They called it surrender. Humanity called it a contract. 10-minute cut. They did not conquer Earth. They filed paperwork. The Kryvex Assembly ended humanity's war in one afternoon by handing over a 14-page surrender document, expecting no one on the planet to read past the signature line. They were wrong about exactly one clause. The war had lasted 6 hours. 3 orbital platforms disabled, 1 experimental railgun array vaporized, and a formal request for cessation delivered to what the Kryvex database still listed as the primary administrative authority of the third planet. The document was titled Instrument of Cessation and Administrative Realignment, Category 9, Non-Compliant Species Variant. Someone in the Kryvex legal office had pulled the wrong template. Ambassador Theskorin delivered the terms himself in perfect English, smiling the whole time. "In a few more centuries," he said, folding his hands, "you might understand why this is generous." Behind him, a screen auto-populated Earth's new designation. Dependent World, Category 9, Praxis 9 Compact Applicable. The room went quiet. Nobody in that room was afraid of the ambassador. Somebody in that room was afraid of missing something. Dr. Alina Voss had spent 19 years teaching international treaty law, funded by a grant committee that asked every year what practical use it could possibly have. She read the document twice before anyone else finished once. She did not raise her hand. She turned to the officer beside her and said quietly, "They didn't write us a surrender, they wrote us a contract. And contracts can be litigated." She got 3 people and a basement conference room that used to house a decommissioned drone lab. Marcus Adami, a treaty archivist, laughed out of 2 conferences for insisting alien signal intercepts contained a functioning legal code. Dr. Priya Nandakumar, a computational semanticist, mocked for arguing that legal ambiguity always defaults to the weaker party's plain language reading. Tobias Reyes, an economist nobody had ever hired to test his own theory of asymmetric trade compliance, because no alien economy had ever existed to test it against, until now. Voss put one sentence on the whiteboard. "I'm interested in everything they thought was worthless." Nobody in the room needed her to explain further. Everybody in the room had spent a career being told the same thing about themselves. Adami found it first, 4 days in, a footnote citing the asterisk compact of Praxis 9 asterisk, a 5,000-year-old framework protecting dependent worlds too underdeveloped for membership. He sat down on the floor because his legs stopped cooperating with the rest of his plan for the day. In 17 prior invocations, a sympathetic Kryvex administrator had always found the clause first. Earth was the only case where a species had found it on its own. Nandakumar found the arbitration clause 6 days later. Ambiguous terms resolve in favor of the weaker party's plain language interpretation. Because the Kryvex had never lost a dispute to a dependent world in 5,000 years, no one had ever bothered updating it. "They wrote the rules to protect species too small to negotiate," she said, standing very still, holding her coffee. "We are on paper exactly that species, which means their rules protect us." Reyes took 11 days on the compensation schedule, cross-referencing 11 categories of extraction the Kryvex had already logged as routine, atmospheric sampling, orbital mineral assay, satellite telemetry, against the compact's own formula. He built in redundancy on every figure, because he expected the number to be challenged, and he wanted the challenge to fail on arithmetic the Kryvex template had generated itself. He sat on the edge of the desk, not the floor, because he wanted to remain tall enough to be taken seriously, and said the number out loud in a voice that came out smaller than he intended. 40 years of accelerated materials science, owed under the compact's own formula. Voss's discovery came last, and it mattered most. Section 14 required any occupying power to install baseline defensive infrastructure on a dependent world, proportional to threat level. 3 years earlier, quietly, the Kryvex had embedded a standard defense lattice into the same 3 platforms they had disabled during the war, because compact infrastructure was cheaper to install by template than to justify skipping in an audit. Nobody on Earth had known those platforms were anything more than derelict. "They installed our weapons for us," Voss said. "They just forgot to tell us that's what they were." The Kryvex Oversight Tribunal noticed on the 19th day, when Earth's compensation claim triggered an automated review no one had disabled in 3 centuries. The response arrived in polished, devastating language. Failure to withdraw within 48 standard hours will necessitate a corrective administrative visit. Voss, read it once. They're not threatening a war, she said. They're threatening an audit, which means they still think this is a paperwork problem. Nobody slept that night. Nobody suggested withdrawing the claim. The corrective visit arrived at hour 47, 11 minutes early. 6 enforcement vessels dropped out of transit above the same sector the war had ended in. Standard pattern corrective cruisers, each carrying a crew of 40 and a weapons loadout designed to make resistance from an undeveloped species look pointless within 90 seconds. Standard doctrine called for a show of force, nothing more. No weapons had been expected to fire. The platforms activated at 91 seconds. 32 directed energy emplacements came online in 4 seconds. The lead vessel took the first strike at its gravitic compensator array, because the platforms had been built from Kryvex schematics, and Kryvex schematics knew exactly where a Kryvex ship was weakest. It lost maneuvering in 6 seconds. A second vessel adapted, jamming the targeting array. For 6 seconds, all 32 emplacements lost lock. It did not matter. Redundant targeting, inherited from the same compact standard schematic used across 300 dependent worlds, reacquired lock in 4 seconds. 2 direct hits. The jamming vessel joined the retreat. 1 vessel broke formation entirely, sustaining 30% structural damage, no crew losses. The platforms did not pursue. Compact doctrine prohibited offensive engagement beyond the world's own boundary, and the system followed its own rules to the letter, the same letter the Kryvex had written. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and 18 seconds. No human weapon fired. No human ship left dock. The War Humanity one was fought entirely with equipment the Kryvex had installed, calibrated, and forgotten to consider a threat. Ambassador Theskorin's official transmission arrived 9 hours later, unchanged in tone. The matter would be escalated to formal tribunal review. His personal transmission arrived 40 minutes after that, unscheduled, addressed to Voss by name. There was a silence before he spoke. I have spent 11 decades assuming that species without our writing had no claim to our rules. That was my error, not the compacts. Another pause. It was, I will admit, audacious. He did not smile this time. I misjudged one specific thing about your species. I assumed slowness of technology implied slowness of comprehension. I was wrong about that specifically, and only that. Voss watched the transmission once. She did not answer that night. She was already drafting the next filing, full technology transfer terms, compressed into a 6-year term instead of the compact's default 18, because Reyes had confirmed Earth's own labs could close most of the gap independently if the first documentation arrived within 18 months. We don't just want what they owe us, she said, to no one in particular still typing. We want it fast enough that we stop needing to ask. The last page of her filing, submitted before dawn, was not a demand. It was a schedule. By the time the sun came up over the basement's one small window, Reyes had already begun drafting a second document nobody had asked him for. A proposal to make the group permanent, no longer 4 people borrowed for an emergency, but a standing office whose only job would be reading whatever the assembly sent next, before anyone signed it. Voss stayed at her desk until the schedule was fully filed. Then she opened the next section of the compact, because somewhere in the 41 pages left, something else was almost certainly waiting to be misfiled, forgotten, or never expected to be read by the species it was meant to protect. She intended to be the one who read it first.